Watch how a quiet woman turns a rich man's world upside down. I worked 12 years at Harcourt and Bly, keeping our money clean and our reports honest. My manager, Victor Lang, liked shiny watches and louder promises. On a wet Monday, he called me into his glass office. He slid a folder across the desk. 10 minutes later, security stood behind my chair, and my pass stopped working. He told the floor I was let go for cause. People turned in their chairs. I felt eyes on my back as if shame had weight. Shame did have weight once, not anymore. The trouble did not begin that morning. It began with small things months earlier. Vendor names that changed by a letter. Invoices that landed at odd hours and cleared in minutes. Amounts that rounded up too neatly. I noticed patterns. Numbers are like cloth. Fraud puckers. The fabric had started to pucker in every ledger Victor touched. I asked soft questions. He said my attention to detail was slowing the team. He said I was married to process. I smiled and kept looking. You can love truth without raising your voice. 2 months before I was fired, I began a simple habit. When a ledger smelled wrong, I saved a PDF and wrote a plain note to myself. Who approved, what changed, and when. No drama, just facts. I asked IT for audit logs, for training. They sent usernames, timestamps, access paths. I saved those too. I did not accuse Victor. I did not gossip. I just watched the river. Fraud is like water. It finds cracks and carves new paths in quiet. If you watch long enough, the current shows you the source. The morning he fired me, I had already sent copies of key files to a secure mailbox I created under a new name. I was not hiding for fun. I was protecting the truth. The numbers no longer added up to late reports or tired staff. They added up to a hole that could swallow a company. I did not know the full size of the hole yet. I only knew it grew each week as Victor's smile grew brighter. When he lifted his wrist to sign my termination letter, the face caught the light. It looked like a medal. He liked winning, even when the race was fake. Security walked me to my desk. A friend pressed a tissue into my hand once. I put my photo in a cardboard box, took my sweater, and left my mug. At the elevator, I glanced toward Victor's office. His blinds were tilted. Through the slats, I saw him lean back, legs crossed, phone at his ear. He smiled like the end was written. He did not know I had written a different beginning. I drove home in rain with no music, just the wipers and a plan. At my kitchen table, I opened my laptop and a folder named Recipes. Inside were not cakes, but receipts, vendor lists, purchase orders, altered invoices, approval screenshots, and audit logs. I made a timeline from 2 years ago to last Friday. Next to each event, I wrote one plain line. I wanted anyone to see the shape of the river. Patterns grew clear. Shell vendors looped money out and back through a consultancy, BY a private fund. Approvals jumped queues as if a door opened for them that never opened for others. The door left footprints, session IDs, IP ranges, device names. The footprints all walked toward the same office. By midnight, I knew this was not office politics. This was theft at scale. I ran totals 2 ways. Even with careful guesses, the loss reached hundreds of millions across contracts worldwide. Bribes hid inside expedition logistics. False rebates wore specialty packaging. Kickbacks sat in marketing pilots. I did not sleep. I checked each link twice. I wrote a 1-page calm summary anyone could follow. I placed it on top of the folder like a lighthouse on a rough coast. If you ever face a storm, write the truth simple. Waves break. Light stays. At 9, I walked into reception with my head high and my termination letter in my bag. The receptionist looked at my badge, then at me. I asked for the board liaison. She hesitated, then called. 5 minutes later, I sat in a small room with a glass wall. The liaison listened as I laid out the simple story. Dates, amounts, names, paths. I did not throw blame. I showed movement. I slid a thin folder across the table and said, "Start with page 6. The general counsel joined. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. He opened the USB, he read. His face hardly moved. But silence has a weight when truth lands. He asked me to wait. 20 minutes later, the chair of the audit committee came in. Gray hair, kind voice, sharp eyes. She asked me to walk her through the first 5 entries as if she knew nothing. I did. Then she asked me to repeat it backward. I did that too. When people test your truth, they become your proof. What happened next moved fast. The board called an emergency session. Someone brought tea and told me to turn off my phone. Across the hall, doors opened and closed. I breathed slow and kept hands steady. I thought of my mother's voice. Keep notes, keep receipts, keep your word. By noon, the liaison returned with the general counsel. He said, "Stay available." His tone had changed from formal to careful. Then the first crack sounded from behind the boardroom door. A chair scraped hard across the floor, followed by Victor's voice rising, then stopping, like a car that stalls in traffic. The pause that followed was long and bright, the kind that comes when people finally see the picture that was always there. The door opened and the liaison looked at me with new knowledge in her eyes. She asked me to step inside for a brief clarification. I stood, smoothed my dress, and followed her toward the room where the end of his story and the beginning of mine were waiting. And what I saw at the head of the table changed everything. Let me take you back to the months before that wet Monday, because big breaks usually begin as small cracks. It started as a whisper in the numbers, a soft pull in totals that someone who watches every day can feel. Each Friday, I checked vendors against deliveries and approvals. Most weeks the river ran clear. Then a new name slid in beside an old supplier like a twin wearing borrowed clothes. Northline Packaging's Limited. Same goods, near prices, fresh bank details that smiled too bright. Alone, that change means nothing. Together with time, it can mean everything. I wrote a calm note to myself. Name shifted one letter, new bank, review. I did not point fingers. I did not carry gossip to lunch. I pinned the note where I would see it and kept watching. A week later, a rebate appeared with kind words and no real sale behind it. Seasonal concession, early benefit. Friendly labels on empty boxes. I tugged the ledger thread and found air where weight should be. Then came the hours. Real people move at human speed. We pause, ask questions, make tea, change our minds. The approvals in question did not pause. They sprinted through chains at 2 a.m, as if one hand held all the keys and enjoyed the dark. The same names appeared again and again, like a chorus repeating one loud line. I asked, soft and steady, why queues were jumping. Victor smiled with his sunny voice and said we were removing friction. I smiled back and wrote down the time. I built a small habit to stay safe. When something smelled wrong, I saved a clean PDF and wrote 5 lines beside it. Who, what, when, where, how much. I added audit logs, because timestamps tell the truth when people forget to. I thanked it with cookies and requested deeper histories for training. They gave me device names, session IDs, and IP ranges. That looks like noise to some. To me, it looks like footprints on a white floor. After a while, you can tell who walks where. Patterns grew like ivy. Shell vendors sat on thin addresses. Rebates arrived without sales. Consulting fees drifted in circles and came back lighter than they left. Each piece alone could be a mistake. Together, they formed a picture. I tried to prove myself wrong, because doubt guards anyone who handles other people's money. I checked again after sleep and again after fresh coffee. The picture did not fade. It sharpened until the edges looked like they could cut. A younger analyst asked how to spot a scheme. I told her to look for laziness in clever people. Real experts do not repeat the same odd habits. Pretenders do, because they are tired. Our approvals carried the same phrasing, the same comma out of place, the same extra space after a period. The rhythm stayed the same even when the names changed. Rhythm tells on us. It always does. I kept notes in plain words, because truth does not need decoration. It needs light and air and patience. Victor loved light. He loved early mornings and the show of effort. He flashed his watch when he leaned across a desk. Winners rise before sunrise, he said. The building badges agreed. The device logs showed a machine waking early, too. 3 mornings. He posted a photo at 5:10. On those same mornings, the system recorded approvals at 5:10. Luck can echo once. When it echoes 3 times, it becomes a sign. I did not get angry. I got patient and traced where each dollar went after the click. Money left our accounts for Northline Packagings. From there, it traveled to a small consultancy named Harbor Finch. Harbor Finch sent funds to a private vehicle listed as Langridge Capital. The first 4 letters made my stomach tighten. L-A-N-G. Victor's last name is Lang. Many names share letters. I told myself to breathe and check. I opened filings, read the tiny footnotes people skim past, and looked at directors with tired eyes and soft shoes. The names changed like masks, but the addresses rhymed. A mailbox shop near Victor's favorite coffee place matched a vendor address. A company secretary served 3 different entities that touched our payments. 2 compliance forms were filed on the same day with the same typo. I added each fine to my timeline with one plain sentence. Big words make smoke. I wanted light. Over weeks, dots became lines, and lines became roads you could trace with a finger. Anyone could follow the map if they cared to sit for 5 quiet minutes and let the noise fall away. Quarter ends told another story. Money rushed out before the books closed, then drifted back in week 1, wearing new tags. It was like pushing a suitcase out the window and pulling it back through the door with a different sticker. Loss hid inside the shuffle. I ran totals 2 ways, conservative and very conservative. Both ways the number sat heavy like a stone in a pocket. I knew I could not be the only one who felt the weight, yet the halls stayed bright and cheerful. Silence can be a thick blanket. An afternoon near spring, a new invoice arrived for a project that had ended months earlier. The description copied an old line, but the account number changed. I ran the route. Our money left for North Line. It jumped to Harbor Finch. Then it moved to Langridge. A second transfer traced a circle, passing through a research partner on the same floor as Harbor Finch. The circle came back thinner, as if 2 fingers had skimmed the top. I wrote, "Circular path confirmed," and kept my voice low and even. I still left room for innocence. I looked for pallets in the warehouse that could fill the gap. I asked for doc photos and shipping logs. I checked purchase orders against receiver notes. I even checked the font inside signatures because templates leave small fingerprints. The font did not match that month. Tiny things betray big lies. I did not celebrate. I put another quiet line in my notes and turned back to the map. When you hold a lantern, you do not wave it. You hold it still and let the light do its work. The last nudge came from a slim appendix in a public filing. It listed investors in Langridge Capital. Most names were masked. One line showed a silent partner with a minority slice. The surname was Langridge. The first name was a short version of a name I had heard only once when Victor's secretary took a call and wrote it softly on a note. I stared until my eyes watered. Then I printed the page and slid it beside my arrows, and I understood that the road did not end where he said it did. By then, my evidence had weight, but it needed shape. I drew boxes and arrows in simple lines. I kept words short so anyone could follow without knowing finance. Dates sat above arrows. Small totals rested in corners. Device logs and badge scans lived in a side table. At the bottom, I wrote one line. Every path returns to the same door. I folded the page and placed it in the front of my folder like a shield, and I waited for the day the door would open and the truth would ask to be seen. That day came with rain. You know how he fired me and how I walked out with quiet hands. This rewind is to show you the pattern behind his smile and the river under our floorboards, because the cliff you watched later was built here, stone by patient stone, while most people were busy with noise. And here is the stone that matters most. The private fund at the end of the trail carried a name that did not belong to a stranger. It carried a name I had already learned to pronounce. At the end sat a fund with his family name, letter for letter. When you work with documents long enough, you start hearing their rhythm. Every signature has its own sound, a kind of silent fingerprint. The way a pen lifts, the angle of the last stroke, it all sings a small truth. That's how I first noticed the forged approvals. My initials appeared on invoices I had never touched. At first glance, they looked perfect. But when I zoomed in, something felt wrong, like a photograph that smiles just a bit too wide. The letters were smooth, but the space between them was not mine. It was the space of someone who had never met my patients. I opened the metadata. It said the file was edited at 2:07 a.m. from Victor's laptop. I knew his device name by heart from IT logs. It always started with VL Lead 01. I scrolled through the approval history. 6 entries, all within 3 minutes, all from the same IP address, all past midnight. No one else could move through the system that fast. Our approval flow required 2 confirmations and 1 secondary key. Those steps had been skipped. That meant someone had special access, the kind that writes its own permission slips. I kept my hands steady. Anger clouds the math. I printed each document, marked it gently in pencil, and stacked them by time. The pattern looked like rainfall, steady, silent, consistent. For 3 months, every Thursday night, new approvals appeared just before dawn. They were all mine, according to the record, and they all released large payments to our trusted partners. trust is an expensive word. I stopped using it that week. At 9 that morning, I walked into Victor's office with a calm question. Did we change the approval chain for supplier payments? He didn't even glance up from his screen. Yes, for efficiency, he said. Finance loves the speed. His voice was sugar. He tapped his watch as if to remind me that time was money and I was wasting both. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out. My pulse stayed quiet. His watch caught the light again. That same gold shimmer I'd noticed before. Same as the logo engraved on a new vendor's invoice header. I took a picture in my mind. Later that day, I tested the system. I sent a mock invoice through a small internal project labeled Audit Trial. I used my regular credentials and watched the timestamp. It processed at 10:14 a.m., perfectly normal. The approval chain moved exactly as it should. 3 checks, 1 delay. The next night, I checked the logs again. A second invoice had moved through, approved by my name, timestamped 3:26 a.m. The system marked approved manually. I had been asleep. Someone had copied my sign-off and pasted it onto their path. It was a signature without a soul. Every forged document carried a quiet clue. Fonts changed subtly between months. The kerning, the way letters hugged or distanced, told a story of copy and paste. Even the digital signature IDs repeated in unnatural ways. Each fake approval borrowed my identifier but appended a single character at the end, like USM-12A instead of USM-12. Tiny, deliberate. A lazy criminal leaves crumbs. A careful one hides them in plain sight. Victor was careful but rushed. Greed makes even clever people tired. I cataloged every variation in a table. Column 1, document name. Column 2, forged signature ID. Column 3, timestamp. Column 4, device tag. Column 5, anomaly. At the bottom, I wrote one sentence for the future. All forged approvals trace back to the same user with system admin rights. I didn't need to write his name. The pattern whispered it already. The more I dug, the more the logs spoke. They showed login sessions that overlapped with his public meetings. How could he approve invoices while sitting in client calls? Then I remembered. His secretary had a mirrored access token. She probably didn't even know what it did. It allowed Victor to act as her or me, sliding through the system unseen. He had built himself a ghost key. One night, around midnight, I stayed late under the excuse of closing the quarter. I opened the admin console and watched for activity. The screen blinked once, then twice. A new session appeared. Via LED01 active. He was home, working, or stealing. I clicked the live monitor, and there it was. Files opening, invoices approving, notifications suppressed. I captured screenshots quietly, my fingers steady on the keys. The audit trail would confirm what my eyes saw, but proof lives longer when doubled. I saved everything twice, one local, one in the cloud. The next morning, Victor arrived smiling. Burning the midnight oil too? He joked, glancing at the tired circles under my eyes. I smiled back. Trying to keep up with the boss, he laughed. His watch flashed again. I couldn't stop thinking how its ticking matched the timestamps on every forged approval. Each second on that dial seemed to echo an act of theft. I wondered if guilt ever whispered between the ticks. Maybe not. Some men mistake noise for rhythm. At lunch, his secretary, Lila, joined me by the vending machine. She looked uneasy, stirring her tea. He's been working late, she said softly. He says it's confidential audits. Her fingers trembled. I didn't answer, just offered a quiet nod. People tell the truth when you give them silence to fill. She added, he asked me to sign something last week, but the file name was your initials. He said it was a formatting fix. My stomach turned. That meant he wasn't just using my name digitally. He was training others to normalize it. I told her that keep everything he gives you, even drafts. She looked at me with grateful eyes, not yet knowing why. By then, the web was visible. Money flowed out like blood from a hidden wound. I mapped the trails again, connecting midnight approvals with morning deposits. The sum stood around $700 million in total exposure. Not all of it was gone yet. Some rested in accounts waiting to be justified by false invoices. It felt like standing on a bridge watching water rise under your feet, knowing you have one chance to warn the town before it floods. When I finished the mapping, I sat in the dark and read every forged line aloud. Hearing my name repeated in someone else's crime made me feel both hollow and strong. He thought my silence was fear. It was preparation. Each word he stole would become a brick in the wall that would surround him later. I stored the proof in 3 places: external drive, secure mail, and a small encrypted card taped under my drawer. Then I closed my laptop, turned off the light, and walked out. The air in the corridor felt heavy, like the building knew what was about to break. At the elevator, I pressed the button and saw my reflection in the doors. I looked calm, too calm, but my eyes had learned a new language, the language of someone who knows the truth and is waiting for the right stage to speak it. The next morning, the audit committee scheduled an unplanned briefing. Victor strutted down the hallway in his perfect suit, his watch gleaming. I followed at a distance, carrying my folder. He believed he owned the narrative. He didn't know that the story had already shifted beneath his feet. And when I walked into that boardroom with my calm notes, I knew his world would tilt before lunch, because on the top of my pile sat one file he could never explain. A log entry showing his direct login, his device ID, his private IP, approving a ghost vendor payment while his calendar claimed he was overseas. The watch on his wrist might tell time, but my evidence told truth. And time was about to run out for him. The next day dawned brighter than it deserved. The city stretched under a blue sky as if nothing could ever go wrong, but my heartbeat didn't match the weather. I ironed my blouse twice, tied my hair back, and checked my folder for the 10th time. Inside lay 3 months of quiet nights, screenshots, logs, invoices, and calm notes. Truth has no perfume, but that folder smelled of ink and resolve. I walked into the building I'd once called safe, badge reactivated by someone higher up who had requests for clarification. Reception looked different when you've been fired once. Faces that once smiled now blinked and whispered. I didn't look away. The board liaison, Mrs. Harland, appeared from a side door and led me toward a smaller conference room, her steps fast but her tone polite. "The board wants to hear your version directly," she said. "There's been activity. I didn't ask what kind. I already knew the shape of storms." Inside, the air felt electric. 3 directors sat at the long table: the audit chair, the legal counsel, and the external compliance partner. Their coffee was untouched. I greeted each quietly, placed my folder in the center, and opened to the summary page I had written like a prayer. 5 lines, plain words, funds misdirected, forged approvals traced to system admin, total exposure, estimated 700 million, evidence attached. I watched their eyes move down the paper, slow and deliberate. Silence settled like snow. The legal counsel spoke first. "You're saying these approvals did not come from you?" I met his eyes. "Not a single one past March 10th. "And you have proof?" "Yes. Timestamps, device IDs, login trails, metadata, and direct overlap with his personal schedule." He glanced at the audit chair, who nodded. "We'll verify everything. Please stay close." They asked me to step through each entry on the first page. I pointed out the subtle details, the mismatched kerning, the unusual overnight timings, the server location that matched Victor's home IP range. The compliance partner leaned forward, his pen frozen mid-note. "These patterns, we've seen them before, but never this clean." I said nothing. Clean crimes leave messy hearts, and his would show soon. After an hour, they paused. "This could be catastrophic," the audit chair whispered. "If accurate, it touches all global operations." "Then accuracy matters," I replied softly. "And you'll find I brought enough to confirm." They excused themselves to the adjoining room to make calls. I sat alone with the quiet hum of the air conditioner. I stared at the glass wall where my reflection looked both smaller and stronger than I remembered. Sometimes the cost of being right is patience. I had already paid part of that price. After 10 minutes, Mrs. Harland returned. "They're calling an emergency board session upstairs," she said. "They've asked you to stay on site." I nodded, closed my folder gently, and followed her through the hallways that smelled of fresh paint and old secrets. Outside the executive suite, voices echoed behind heavy doors. My manager's tone, confident, performative, sharp, cut through like glass. He was already trying to control the story. I caught a fragment. "She's mistaken. Old logs. Probably her own confusion after termination." The words rolled off him smoothly, practiced. Lies often sound more comfortable than truth at first. I stood behind the frosted glass, waiting, holding my notes close. The liaison whispered, "You'll be called soon." I could see his silhouette through the blur, gesturing as though painting himself as the hero. I almost pitied him. He didn't realize that heroes never need to raise their voices. When the door finally opened, the chairman's assistant waved me in. The boardroom looked like a stage. 12 directors, 2 advisors, and Victor standing near the screen with a slide that read, "Operational Integrity Review." He froze for half a second when he saw me. His smile returned quickly, brittle. "Ah, yes, Ms. Please let her speak first," the chairman interrupted. His tone had changed from cordial to clipped. I walked to the head of the table, plugged in the small USB drive, and projected a single image, a simple map of arrows, dates, and account names. "I believe visuals help," I said. Then I pressed the arrow key. Each slide showed a step in the pattern, short and clear. Vendor creation, overnight approvals, fund transfer, secondary consultancy, private fund link. Victor's hands tightened behind his back. One director murmured, "Those transfers match the ones flagged last quarter." Another whispered, "Same addresses." The compliance advisor looked from the screen to Victor, then to me. Who else had this access? "Only the person with system admin credentials," I said quietly. Victor tried to interrupt. "This is speculation. Anyone could—" The legal counsel raised a hand. "We'll confirm. We already have log IDs cross-referenced with device names." His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold steel. I turned one more slide. An image of a watch face frozen at 3:26 a.m. beside a timestamp log. This was the approval time for the largest payment. The same minute Mr. Lang posted a photo on social media, showing this watch, same timestamp. The file metadata confirms it was uploaded from his laptop seconds later. The room went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The chairman exhaled slowly. "That's quite a coincidence, Mr. Lang." Victor straightened, voice trembling now. "This is out of context." "Then we'll let the audit firm provide the context," the chairman replied. The general counsel gathered my folder and said, "We'll secure these originals." I nodded, handed over duplicates, and closed my laptop. "Ms. Hale," the chairman said, using my last name with quiet respect, "please wait outside while we deliberate." Outside, the hallway was empty. My palms were cold, but my heartbeat was steady. I watched a janitor wipe fingerprints off the glass door. Strange how the world keeps moving while truths rearrange lives inside a single room. 5 minutes passed. Then 10, then 20. Behind the door, voices rose, muffled but sharp. The word fraud landed once, heavy as thunder. A chair scraped. Someone shouted my name. I froze, then forced myself to breathe. The liaison appeared again, her face pale but focused. "They've called an emergency vote," she whispered. "You'll need to stay nearby." "For how long?" "Until the decision is made and—" She hesitated, glancing back toward the room. "He's not taking it well." I followed her to a smaller waiting area where the city skyline glimmered through tall windows. Below, people moved like clockwork, unaware that $700 million of betrayal was unraveling just above their heads. I watched the clouds drift past the glass and thought of every long night I'd spent gathering proof. Every moment I'd doubted myself. This was the edge of something irreversible. Whatever came next, I couldn't go back to quiet routines and polite nods. Then, from the boardroom, came the sound of a door slamming and hurried footsteps. Victor stormed out, face white, tie askew, eyes burning. He passed me without a word, but his expression said enough. Shock, disbelief, fear, and fury all at once. Behind him, the chairman's voice carried through the half-open door. "Get legal on the line, now." The liaison looked at me with a strange mix of awe and caution. "Stay right here," she whispered. "They'll want you back in soon." I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and stared at the rain beginning to trace lines down the window. The storm outside had finally caught up with the one inside, and as I waited for them to call me back into that room, I knew something deep and certain. The truth had finally entered the building, and it wasn't leaving without company. They called me back in at 2 that afternoon. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee gone cold and stress that had no place to hide. Everyone looked a little older than they had that morning. Victor was not there. His chair stood pushed back, abandoned. The chairman gestured toward the seat beside the audit chair. "Ms. Hale, please sit. We'd like to go over the data one more time in your words." I sat, folded my hands on the table, and let silence settle until it felt steady. Then I began. "This isn't about one bad invoice," I said. "It's about a system that trusted signatures more than people. 3 schemes worked together like gears in a single clock. Gear 1, shell vendors. They carried names that sounded real but delivered nothing. Northline, Harbor Finch, Ridgeway Supply. Each produced near-identical invoices that bounced through our system faster than genuine ones ever could. Gear 2, false rebates. Every quarter, funds flowed out as customer incentives, but returned through consulting contracts under slightly new names. It made the income sheet glow while the cash quietly bled. Gear 3, kickbacks disguised as marketing pilots. Those pilots existed only on paper. Payments left our accounts, circled through subsidiaries, and came back lighter. The audit chair leaned forward. "You're saying all 3 link to the same endpoint?" "Yes," I replied, sliding a chart across. "Different masks, same actor. Every road ends at Langridge Capital." The legal counsel studied the spreadsheet, his pen tapping. "And your estimate, 700 million, is conservative?" "It is," I said softly. "It counts only confirmed transfers, not the echo transactions that may surface later." He exhaled through his nose, a quiet whistle of disbelief. The chairman rubbed his temples. "How did this pass external review?" I turned the page to show overlapping timestamps. He used system admin privileges to approve, delete, and resequence entries. "The files you received for quarterly checks were already cleaned. The audit trail you trusted was written by the suspect himself." A murmur ran around the table. Someone cursed under their breath. I continued, keeping my voice even. "Each forged approval reused my credentials. Here you'll see the pattern, ID code with 1 added character. That's how he hid in plain sight." The compliance partner shook his head slowly. "I've seen fraud, but never one built on another person's reputation this precisely." "Reputation is the best disguise," I said. "No one questions honesty until it's gone." I clicked the next slide, a side-by-side of 2 documents, one genuine, one forged. The difference was microscopic, a spacing shift you'd miss without care. "That's how far deceit will go to look respectable," I said. 0.5 millimeter of arrogance. The room stayed still for several breaths. Then the chairman spoke again. "We will need your cooperation with forensic investigators. You understand the sensitivity." "Yes. I've prepared copies for them. Chain of custody folders are labeled by timestamp." The legal counsel looked at me, half impressed, half worried. "You prepared this before you were dismissed?" "I started preparing the day I saw the first ghost invoice," I answered. Being careful isn't paranoia, it's survival. Outside, rain streaked the windows again. It drummed a soft rhythm that filled the pauses between questions. Each drop sounded like a tick from that golden watch. A director at the far end finally asked, "Why did you come back, after being treated that way?" "Because the truth was still here," I said. "And it needed a witness who hadn't sold it." He nodded once, and something in his posture changed, from suspicion to quiet respect. The chairman closed his folder. "Ms. Hale, thank you. The board will meet privately to determine next steps. Legal will coordinate with the authorities. We may also discuss corrective leadership measures." I understood what that meant without explanation. Victor's time had run out. Now came the slow turning of the gears he had wound too tight. As I rose to leave, the audit chair said softly, "Courage doesn't always sound loud." I smiled faintly. Neither does proof. In the hallway, I leaned against the cool glass wall and finally exhaled. The relief didn't feel like victory. It felt like quiet exhaustion, the kind that comes when you stop holding the world upright by yourself. Downstairs, employees were whispering. News travels faster than official memos. Someone had seen security escort Victor out of the parking level. Another claimed he'd shouted about misunderstandings and vendettas. I didn't want to hear it. I walked out into the drizzle and tilted my face toward the gray sky. On the street corner, my phone buzzed. An email from internal audit. Your evidence aligns with preliminary findings. Thank you for preserving integrity. Just one line, but it made my knees weak. I sat on a bench, breathing the damp air, watching cars blur by. When you spend months fighting silently, the first recognition feels unreal. I wasn't after praise. I wanted proof to win over noise, and for the first time, it had. Still, another thought crept in. The company would need rebuilding. Hundreds of people had trusted a man who used that trust like a ladder. They would blame themselves, or worse, lose faith in the honest ones. My task wasn't finished. Truth had exposed the wound, but healing needed hands. As I walked toward the train, my reflection in a window caught my eye. Tired, steady, older maybe, but unbroken. Somewhere behind me, the boardroom phones were ringing, lawyers aligning, auditors tracing numbers through the night. I knew it wasn't over until the confession matched the evidence. And evidence, I had learned, never sleeps. The rain thickened into proper drops, scattering light across the pavement. I clutched my folder closer, not out of fear, but habit. Then my phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering. I answered. A familiar voice whispered, shaking. It's Lila. They're asking questions. He's saying he was framed by you. My pulse quickened, but my voice stayed calm. Tell the truth, Lila. Just tell them what you saw. She hesitated. You don't understand. He has recordings, and he says they prove you knew. I stopped walking, the crowd parting around me. My reflection in the glass no longer looked calm. It looked like someone standing at the edge of another storm. Send me nothing, I said quietly. Keep yourself safe. Then I hung up and stood in the rain until the streetlights blurred. The truth had finally spoken, but the liar wasn't done yet. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain kept talking against the window, repeating the same soft warnings. He isn't done. He isn't done. I lay awake until dawn, running through every file in my head, checking for weak points in the chain of truth. I'd been careful, but Victor was desperate now, and desperate men turn clever for a short while before they collapse. By morning, rumors moved faster than the elevators. Some said the board had suspended him. Others whispered about the police. But what made my stomach twist was a new headline on our internal network. Company investigates alleged fraud. Both parties under review. Both parties. The words tasted like rust. He was pulling me back into his web even as it unraveled. I arrived early and found 2 HR officers waiting by my desk. Their smiles were polite, brittle, scripted. We just need to ask a few clarifying questions, one said, gesturing toward a small meeting room. I followed without protest. Inside sat the compliance head, tablet in hand, voice neutral. We received copies of certain emails that suggest you may have been aware of irregularities before you reported them. I felt my pulse slow, then steady. Show me, I said. He turned the screen. There were messages, my name, my signature, words I never wrote, dated months earlier. They looked authentic enough to fool anyone who didn't live in my inbox. Victor had forged emails to make it appear I'd helped him cover his tracks. The irony nearly made me laugh. He had learned the art of imitation too well. These came from his personal device. The compliance head continued carefully. We're verifying headers and metadata now. Then you'll see they were generated from copies of my archived messages, I replied. He's recycling lines from genuine threads and adding new endings. They exchanged a glance. So you're saying the messages are fabricated? Yes, and if you check the sequence numbers, you'll find duplicates. True emails never share sequence IDs. They nodded, already taking notes. I knew it would take time, but truth has patience on its side. Lies burn fast and bright. Facts glow slow and steady. By noon, the IT forensics team confirmed it. The forged emails had been built using copied fragments of my old correspondence. Victor's fingerprints were all over them. Identical compression signatures, identical device tags. Still, the damage lingered. Once a rumor breathes, it walks alone. People I'd known for years avoided my eyes that afternoon. I went to the cafeteria for coffee and found Lila sitting alone, staring at her phone. When she saw me, her eyes filled instantly. "I didn't know he'd do this," she whispered. "He told me to forward certain reports last month, said they were part of a new audit. They had your initials on them." I sat beside her. "He used your access too," I said gently. "You couldn't have known." She bit her lip. "They're asking about me now. He's saying I helped hide payments. Then tell them everything. The late nights, the drafts, even the small things." She nodded, tears trembling. "He scared me," she admitted, "but not anymore." Later, the internal forensics team interviewed her under oath. She described the odd requests, the unsigned forms, the hush calls after midnight. Each word she spoke filled another blank in the map I had built. The truth was rebuilding itself through witnesses now. It no longer needed only my voice. Meanwhile, HR gathered statements from finance staff. Several mentioned how Victor insisted on manual sign-offs when systems lagged. One analyst recalled him saying, "If anyone asks, just say IT approved it." Another remembered shredding extra copies at his request. Tiny memories, small enough to seem harmless alone, but together they formed a chorus of warning notes. In the afternoon, I met the legal counsel again. He looked exhausted, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "We found inconsistencies in his own story," he said. For instance, he claimed to be in Zurich during one of the disputed approvals. Flight records show he never left the city. "He doesn't realize how many footprints he left," I murmured. "He will soon," he said. That evening, as the board prepared for another meeting, I sat in the quiet corner of the lobby with a cup of tea and my phone on silent. The building buzzed with low conversations. The air smelled like paper, ink, and something heavier, fear maybe, or relief fighting to be born. Then Lila appeared again, this time clutching a sealed envelope. Her face was pale but determined. "I found this in the drawer he told me never to touch," she said. She slid the envelope toward me. "It has old contracts, signed under fake names. I thought they were backups, but the handwriting, it's his." "Keep one copy for yourself," I whispered. "Give the rest to legal. Don't hand it to me." She nodded. "I already did. They're scanning them now." I watched her walk away, back straight. No trembling hands this time. Small bravery, but real. Sometimes justice begins with one frightened person deciding not to be afraid anymore. Moments later, my phone buzzed. Message from the legal counsel. "We have the envelope." Confirmed his handwriting. Cross-checking signatures with vendor files. The gears were turning faster now, clicking toward the inevitable. But Victor wasn't quiet yet. As the board meeting began upstairs, someone forwarded me an email thread he had just sent to senior managers. It accused me of colluding with external auditors for personal gain. He claimed I'd planned the exposure to leverage a promotion. I read it twice, then once more, letting the absurdity wash over me. Lies always scream louder at the end. They run out of room to hide, so they start setting fires hoping the smoke will distract from the truth. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Every word he wrote would be preserved as fresh evidence of retaliation. The board would see it, the investigators would log it, and each keystroke would hammer another nail in his narrative. At 8 that evening, the legal counsel called. "We've completed cross-verification," he said. "Your data holds. His doesn't. We have him forging more than financial documents now." I closed my eyes, breathing the sentence like air. "Then it's almost over," I said. "Almost," he agreed. "There's one last piece we're verifying. The transfer signatures tie directly to an account opened under his brother's name. Once we confirm that, the case is sealed." I hung up, finally allowing myself to lean back. My reflection in the darkened glass smiled faintly, not out of triumph, but out of sheer relief. For months, I'd been the only one listening to the numbers whisper. Now the whole company could hear them shout. And just when I thought the day couldn't twist any further, the elevator dinged softly. 2 security officers stepped out and headed toward the boardroom. Their faces were unreadable. Behind them, a man from the external audit firm carried a black briefcase. I stood by the window, watching their reflections move across the polished floor until they disappeared behind the door marked, Executive session. The building fell silent, except for the soft hum of lights overhead. I waited, hands clasped, heart steady. Then, faint but clear, I heard the sound of raised voices, his among them, breaking for the first time. The cracks in his story had finally opened wide enough for everyone to see daylight through them. And daylight, once it enters, never leaves quietly. Morning arrived pale and cold. The air carried that kind of silence that follows after thunder. Heavy, expectant, slightly trembling. I dressed slowly, not in celebration, not in fear, but in a strange calm that comes when you know the world is about to correct itself. The company had called another emergency session, this one involving outside investigators. The headlines hadn't leaked yet, but they would. Truth always finds its audience. When I reached the lobby, a familiar face waited by reception. Lila. Her shoulders were squared this time, her hair tied back, her eyes clear. "They want me to testify," she said softly. "Under oath. You'll be fine," I told her. "Just say what you saw, how it happened. Leave emotion out. Let facts speak," she nodded. I didn't sleep, but I'm done being afraid. We walked together to the upper floor where the investigators had set up temporary offices. The walls were glass, the lights bright, as if designed to keep shadows away. Inside, 2 men and 1 woman sat at a long table. One introduced himself as the lead forensic accountant, another as a representative from the external law firm. "We're recording everything," he said. "Transparency helps everyone," Lila began softly, describing how Victor had asked her to clean up signatures, how he'd dictated phrases to insert into reports, how he'd shredded drafts after calling them unnecessary clutter. Each detail built another rung on the ladder of proof. When she described seeing him log in under my name late at night, the accountant looked up sharply. "You're sure it was her ID?" "Yes," she said. He even joked about it, said, "She works even when she sleeps." The woman from the law firm jotted something quickly. "That line will be important," she said. I watched Lila's hands as she spoke. Steady now, her fingers no longer trembling. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet voice that refuses to stop speaking. After her testimony, they asked me to stay. I handed over an additional folder, the final set of logs showing the IP addresses tied to the ghost approvals. The lead accountant studied them, eyebrows lifting. These correspond to a home network registered under the name Langridge Holdings. There's also a secondary account, different address, same owner's surname. "His brother," I said. "Check the bank filings. You'll see a joint authorization dated the same week the fraud began." He nodded slowly. "You've done most of our work for us." "Just followed the trail," I replied. It was always there. By noon, word spread that law enforcement had been contacted. The board was cooperating fully, handing over files, authorizing disclosures. The company issued a short statement to the press. "Preliminary findings indicate significant financial misconduct by a senior executive. Internal whistleblower cooperation has been crucial in uncovering the scheme." They didn't name me, but they didn't need to. Inside the building, everyone already knew. Later that afternoon, I received a call from the forensic team. "We've found something new," the lead accountant said. "A wire transfer from Langridge Capital to a private offshore account. It's under a trust name, Valerian Ventures, but the routing number matches a file from your records." "What's in the file?" I asked. "An internal project labeled Integrity Initiative. Signed by Victor Lang." I closed my eyes for a moment. "So he built a fund named for honesty to hide dishonesty." "Yes," the accountant said quietly. "We have copies of the transfer authorizations. He signed them himself. They sent me a scanned image of one authorization. The signature looped elegantly, confident and careless like every lie he'd ever told. Underneath was a handwritten note for strategic realignment. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how many times he'd written words like that without trembling. Evening fell early. The building emptied faster than usual. People walked in hushed groups, whispering, glancing toward the closed boardroom doors. I stayed behind, sitting by the window with a cup of cold tea, watching the city lights flicker to life. At 6, my phone buzzed again. Lila. Her voice trembled slightly this time, though not from fear. "They asked me to sign an affidavit," she said. "They said it'll go to the authorities." "That's good," I told her. "Once you sign, it's protected evidence. No one can twist it anymore." "There's something else," she added. While I was packing my desk, I found a flash drive in his drawer. It's labeled Quarterly Archive. Should I bring it to them? "Yes," I said immediately. "Don't open it. Just hand it to legal." She agreed. And within half an hour, she messaged again. "Delivered." They looked shocked when they saw the contents. The next morning, I learned why. The drive contained recorded calls, Victor's voice, instructing vendors to reroute payments, promising bonuses for silence, even mocking the board. But the most damning piece was a conversation between him and his brother, discussing our offshore lifeboat. The wire transfers matched every word. When they played me a short clip in the conference room, my skin prickled. His voice sounded calm, almost amused. "She's too careful," he said. "If she ever catches on, we'll just make her look obsessed. People never believe quiet women when they warn about storms." The irony hit like a slap. He'd underestimated not just me, but the patience of truth. The investigators paused the recording, glancing toward me. "This is the final piece," one said. "Combined with the paper trail, it seals the case." By evening, law enforcement had arrived quietly. No spectacle, just calm efficiency. They met with the board behind closed doors, collected documents, and left without drama. The company issued another statement confirming cooperation with authorities in an ongoing criminal investigation. I walked out into the night with a strange mix of heaviness and lightness. The sky was clear now, stars peeking through city haze. For months I had carried the story alone. Now it had witnesses, recordings, signatures, and an unbroken chain of truth. As I reached the parking lot, my phone vibrated one last time, an unknown number again. I hesitated, then answered. A male voice spoke, low and hurried. "You think you've won?" he said. "But you don't know what else is buried." "Victor," I said quietly, recognizing the bitterness. "The only thing buried now is your luck." He laughed once, sharp and hollow, then hung up. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the dark horizon. There might indeed be more hidden somewhere. Fraud this big rarely ends neatly. But whatever else was buried, the ground had started to crack, and I wasn't afraid of digging anymore. The next morning, a news alert popped on my phone. CEO under investigation for corporate fraud. Authorities confirm evidence supplied by internal whistleblower. My name wasn't there, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Let the truth stand alone. It didn't need a face. Inside the company, the atmosphere shifted. People walked straighter. Conversations softened. Fear began to dissolve into something that looked like respect. The storm had left damage, but it had also washed the air clean. Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The numbers had told one story, but there was a deeper one yet to surface. A hidden account, perhaps, or another name in the shadows. The witnesses had spoken, the wire had sung, but the final chord hadn't yet resolved. And I would soon learn that the next revelation would not come from the accountants, or even the board, but from a place I least expected. Because sometimes, the person who holds the last piece of the truth is the one who once stood closest to the lie. By the time dawn broke again, everything had changed. The building that once buzzed with chatter now felt like a courtroom without walls. Every step echoed, every whisper carried meaning. The air smelled of fresh printer ink, paper trails, and panic covered by perfume. I walked through security, nodded to the guards, and watched as they stopped Victor at the door. He looked smaller than I remembered, his confidence worn thin, his golden watch now a trembling weight on his wrist. They escorted him upstairs without words. I didn't watch long. There are moments you don't savor, even when they feel like justice. Vindication is quiet, almost gentle. It doesn't cheer, it just exhales. Inside, the boardroom lights were already on. The chairman greeted me with the kind of politeness people reserve for those who've carried burdens on their behalf. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Hale," he said. We'll need you to remain available while we formalize statements. I understand. He looked at me for a long moment, then added softly, You did the right thing. Not everyone would have. I nodded, unsure whether that was praise or apology. Both, perhaps. Outside the boardroom, news spread faster than official words could catch up. Staff huddled near desks, pretending to work while messages buzzed across screens. Someone whispered that Victor had tried to delete his personal files that morning, but IT had already locked his accounts. Another claimed he'd shouted in the elevator about betrayal from within. I tried not to listen, but curiosity is human. Justice can't stop the heart from wondering how far guilt will go before it bows. By noon, the board issued an internal statement. Effective immediately, Victor Lang is suspended pending legal proceedings. Interim leadership will be announced. It was brief, sterile, factual, but beneath those few words lay the wreckage of his empire. The fake vendors, the forged approvals, the offshore wires. I sat at my desk, reading the email twice. 12 years of my life had unfolded in these halls, and now they were rewriting their story without him. There was relief, but also a strange sadness. Even villains leave a hollow space when they fall. Later that day, the General Counsel asked me to join the investigation team as an independent advisor. The word independent felt heavy, but right. You know the system better than anyone, he said. We need your eyes to make sure every stone is turned. I'll help, I said. But only if we do it cleanly this time. No shortcuts, no secrets. He smiled, a small, tired smile. Agreed. While the investigation unfolded, new discoveries kept surfacing. Offshore trusts, hidden property titles, and dummy corporations registered to relatives appeared like weeds after rain. Every find confirmed that the river I'd followed had many branches. Each document carried his fingerprints. The same arrogance that had once made him charming now marked every forged file. But truth, once it starts rolling, doesn't stop at one man. It rolls through everything built on lies. Within a week, 2 senior managers resigned quietly. Another requested early retirement. Auditors from 3 countries joined the review. The company that had once prided itself on discretion was now learning transparency by force. One evening, as I left the building, I saw a group of junior employees waiting near the exit. They smiled shyly, uncertain whether they were allowed to speak. One of them finally said, "Thank you for not letting this destroy us." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Gratitude felt too big and too small at the same time. That night, I received a message from an unknown number again. But this one was different. It was from Victor's brother. The text was short. He's not taking responsibility. He says he'll blame the board, and you. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed back one line. Tell him the evidence speaks louder than either of us. No reply came. The next morning, law enforcement arrived with quiet precision. 2 plainclothes officers and 1 investigator entered through the side door. They met the board upstairs and left an hour later with sealed envelopes and 1 escorted executive. There was no spectacle, just the soft sound of leather shoes on marble and the low murmur of authority. Victor didn't look at anyone as they guided him out. He just stared straight ahead, his watch still gleaming under the lights, its ticking now meaningless against the rhythm of consequence. When the elevator doors closed behind him, the building seemed to exhale. Conversations started again, tentative, cautious, like birds testing the air after a storm. Later that afternoon, I was called into the boardroom again. The chairman stood by the window, sunlight painting long shadows across the carpet. He's been taken into custody, he said quietly. We've informed stakeholders. It will be public by evening. I nodded. What happens now? Now we rebuild. He turned toward me. And we'd like you to help lead that process. For a moment, I couldn't speak. You mean... Yes, he said. A new position. Director of Compliance and Integrity. You'll report directly to the board. We need someone whose loyalty is to the truth, not to any one of us. I thought of all the nights spent doubting myself, of every whispered warning, of the fear that had followed me through corridors lit too bright. I thought of Lila, the team, the people who had believed in decency even when it cost them. Then I said softly, "I'll do it, but only if we promise full transparency. No secrets buried under good intentions." "Deal," he said. "You have my word." As I walked out, staff looked up from their desks, nodding quietly. The atmosphere had changed. Fear had turned into cautious hope. The walls no longer felt like they were listening. They felt like they could breathe again. That evening, news broke. Corporate fraud exposed. CEO arrested following internal whistleblower investigation. My name didn't appear, but my phone filled with messages from colleagues, strangers, even old friends. Some said thank you. Others said they were proud. A few admitted they had doubted me, but were now inspired. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I sat by my window at home, sipping tea, watching the sunset burn through thin clouds. Justice had arrived, but it wasn't triumph I felt. It was closure, fragile and real. Then my phone rang once more. Lila. Her voice was calm now, almost peaceful. "They asked me to stay," she said. "In your department." I said yes. I smiled. "Good. Keep your notes sharp and your heart honest." "I will," she said. "And thank you for showing me that silence isn't safety." After the call, I closed my eyes, letting the quiet fill the room. I thought of the first day, the humiliation, the firing, the tears I'd hidden in my car. All of it led here, to truth standing where fear once sat. But just as peace began to settle, an email pinged on my screen. Subject line, unverified account transfer. The sender was the forensic team. The message was short. "We found another fund, larger than the last. We'll need your insight tomorrow." I stared at it for a long moment. Justice, it seemed, was still working overtime. The fall had begun, but the river of lies still ran deeper than anyone had guessed. Morning light poured through the blinds like a new beginning, trying to touch everything still half in shadow. I sat at my desk, the same spot where I had once been fired, only now the nameplate read, Director of Compliance and Integrity. I traced the letters with my fingertip. Titles never mattered much to me. Truth still did. The inbox on my screen blinked with hundreds of messages, but one line stood out. The forensic team's note from last night. Another fund, larger than the last. I called the lead accountant as soon as the clock struck 8. He answered on the first ring. "We ran the numbers all night," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "There's a separate offshore structure, a trust linked to a dummy corporation in the Caribbean. Total exposure could exceed what we've already reported." "How much?" I asked. "Close to 900 million. Silence held the line between us. Then I said, "Send me the documentation. I'll prepare the summary for the board." Half an hour later, the files arrived. 30 folders of transactions, cross-border transfers, invoices labeled research partnerships, and payment approvals signed with names I had never seen. But the pattern, oh, it was painfully familiar. The same rhythm, the same falsified timestamps, the same arrogance dressed as formality. By noon, I had rewritten everything into plain language. No jargon, no hiding behind technical terms. When money lies, it uses complicated words. Truth, I've learned, uses short ones. My report was 5 pages long, clean, direct, human. At 2, the board gathered again. The chairman opened the meeting with a sigh. "We hoped it was over," he said. "So did I replied. "But systems don't lie. People do." I walked them through the new findings, line by line. "Here's what happened," I said. "He created a second network of shell companies under different jurisdictions. The payments were disguised as innovation grants. Each transfer appeared legitimate on its own, but collectively they bled the company quietly. He used the same access credentials, the same timing, the same method, only this time he routed it through offshore entities." The legal counsel rubbed his forehead. "And we missed this because it never touched our domestic ledgers." "Yes," I said. "He built a maze of mirrors, but mirrors still reflect the truth when the light hits right." I turned the next page and continued. The trail ends in an investment trust registered under his brother's company, Langridge Holdings. We have emails, bank statements, and IP matches confirming control from Victor's personal devices. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the projector. Then, one by one, the directors began to nod, not in surprise anymore, but in weary acceptance. The chairman spoke softly. "What should we do with this?" "Expose it entirely," I said. "No settlements, no private deals. If we hide even a single thread, we become what he was." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "Prepare the full disclosure. And Ms. Hale, this time, write it so even a stranger can understand it." I smiled faintly. "That's the only way I write." Over the next 48 hours, we worked like a single heartbeat. Teams verified accounts, lawyers drafted statements, auditors prepared reports. I reviewed every paragraph to ensure it was written in language my mother could have understood. Because truth is only powerful when ordinary people can see it clearly. When the press conference came, the board spoke first, delivering facts in calm tones. They outlined the fraud, the recovery plan, the cooperation with authorities. Then they invited me to read the closing statement, in recognition of the person who refused to let silence win. I stepped up to the microphone, the light soft but steady. My voice didn't shake. "This company made mistakes," I began. "It trusted speed over care and confidence over proof. I did too once, but the numbers told a story that words tried to hide. I simply chose to listen." I paused, scanning the faces before me. Reporters, employees, strangers. Fraud is not cleverness. It's laziness wearing a mask. And truth is not loud, it's persistent. When something feels wrong, you don't need permission to question it. You need patience to follow it. Cameras clicked. Pens scratched across notepads. The air carried the weight of something honest finally spoken aloud. After the conference, people approached quietly, thanking me not for exposing a crime, but for explaining it in words they could grasp. "You made it human," one journalist said. "Most reports read like puzzles. Yours reads like life." That evening, the board convened one last time to decide the company's future. The chairman spoke first. "We've accepted responsibility. We'll repay, restructure, and rebuild. But more than that, we'll remember what integrity costs and what it saves." He turned to me. "You started this by asking small questions. You finished it by giving us clear answers. What do you suggest next?" I took a breath. Transparency shouldn't be an event. It should be a habit. Publish summaries quarterly. Simplify reports so anyone can read them. Keep truth visible, even when it's inconvenient. The room stayed quiet. Then the audit chair smiled. "Plain English," she said. "Let's make that our new policy." Laughter rippled softly through the tension, breaking it apart. For the first time in months, the room felt light. Later, as the board voted on formal resolutions, I was asked to step outside. The same glass hallway where I had once waited in fear now shimmered under evening light. I watched the sun bleed into the city skyline, painting gold over gray. The world outside didn't know that redemption was unfolding behind those doors. But maybe it didn't need to. Some victories are best witnessed by silence. After a few minutes, the liaison reappeared, smiling. "They'd like you to come back in." Inside, the chairman stood with the final report in his hand. The board has voted unanimously to approve full public disclosure, restitution, and permanent compliance reforms. And we'd like to offer you continued oversight, on your terms. I nodded, words catching for a second. "On one condition," I said. "Every report we issue starts with a promise written in plain English. No hidden numbers, no hidden names." "Done," he said. Applause rose, soft but sincere. Not the loud celebration of victory, just the quiet sound of relief. I walked out afterward, the corridor lights guiding me like old friends. The air felt lighter. The truth, once a fragile whisper in my hands, now stood tall enough to speak for itself. Outside, the night was still and clear. I looked up at the sky, thinking about every moment that had brought me here. The bouquet of congratulations that wilted in my hands. The forged approvals, the midnight audits, the quiet allies, the cracks in his story, and now this, truth in plain English. But as I reached my car, my phone vibrated again. A new email, no sender listed, just a subject line. You didn't find all of it. I opened it. Inside was a single attachment, an image of a document bearing Victor's signature and the words, Project Horizon, pending. I stared at it, heart steady but mind racing. Maybe the story wasn't quite finished after all. Truth had spoken. But perhaps it still had one more chapter waiting in the shadows, ready to be heard. I stared at the email for a long time before I moved. You didn't find all of it. The words pulsed like a heartbeat on the screen. The attachment glowed faintly. Project Horizon, pending. Victor's name sat at the bottom in his neat handwriting. I'd thought the story was over, but truth, I was learning, rarely closes its book neatly. It leaves a page unturned just to see who's willing to read on. I forwarded the file to the forensic team with one short note. Verify origin and metadata. Then I shut my laptop and breathed. Whether it was a final trick or a genuine thread didn't matter. The company now had a system strong enough to handle either. My part, I realized, might finally be nearing its last line. The following morning, the office didn't hum like it used to. It breathed. People smiled again. Soft, unsure smiles, like someone waking from a long, bad dream. Posters went up on the walls. Integrity, transparency, accountability. Words that had once been mere slogans now felt like living promises. At 10, the board called one final meeting. No panic this time, no accusations. Just resolution. The chairman stood by the window, sunlight cutting through dust motes like threads of gold. We've confirmed the last file, he said. It was a decoy. He tried to plant false leads before his arrest, but the trail ends here. A quiet sigh of relief moved through the room. I nodded, feeling something deep inside unclench. The story had truly found its end. He handed me a folder. The restitution plan is in motion, he said. Funds recovered, assets frozen. The company will survive. More importantly, it will learn. Good, I said. Let it remember the cost of forgetting ethics. He smiled faintly. We've also decided something else. We're creating a permanent internal integrity office, and we'd like you to lead it. Officially. For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. Then I said, if I accept, I want a condition. He raised an eyebrow. Go on. No culture of fear. Anyone, from janitor to senior partner, can question a number. No retaliation, no whispers. Agreed, he said simply. He extended his hand. I took it. It felt nothing like victory, more like closure sealed in skin and memory. When the meeting ended, I walked through the building that had once been both my pride and my prison. People stopped me in the hall to say thank you, not loudly, just with quiet eyes that said they could finally breathe. One woman from accounting slipped me a note. You made truth look possible again. I folded it carefully and kept it in my pocket. Later that day, I visited the archive room, rows of locked cabinets, the smell of paper and ink still thick in the air. I placed the final report in the top drawer labeled Case Closed. Then I stood there for a moment, remembering the first time I'd stood in this room, terrified, collecting evidence in the shadows. Now the light reached even the corners. Outside, the sky was clean. Rain had washed the glass facade so bright it almost hurt to look at. Lila joined me by the elevator, holding a stack of papers. They're rebuilding vendor checks, she said. No more shortcuts. Good, I said. Shortcuts are where lies like to hide, she smiled. You think he'll ever understand what he lost? No, I said softly. People who build empires on deceit never look back long enough to see what they've broken. But I do hope he learns what honesty sounds like when it walks through a hallway. She nodded and pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, she whispered, You were right all along. Not right, I said. Just stubborn enough to wait for proof. Weeks passed. The company issued its public apology, pledged reforms, and began to rebuild trust brick by careful brick. Investors stayed, employees returned, and letters poured in from people who'd faced their own versions of Victor, small tyrants in shiny suits who thought intimidation was power. They wrote to say my story gave them courage. I never replied publicly. I didn't need to. Courage doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs room to breathe. One afternoon, as I sorted through paperwork, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a short handwritten note, you didn't just expose him. You reminded us what integrity looks like when it stops apologizing for existing. Thank you, no signature. Maybe from an employee, maybe from someone else entirely. I smiled and tucked it into the same drawer as the old note from accounting. Months later, news broke of Victor's conviction. 10 years. Restitution mandated. The article was matter-of-fact, stripped of glamour. The photograph showed him older already, his posture bent, his watch gone. I didn't feel triumph, just completion. Justice had its rhythm, slow, steady, sure. That night, I sat by my window again, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. The city lights flickered, steady as breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying the story in my head. It had found its full stop. Still, as I looked out, I thought of everyone who might be sitting somewhere right now, holding proof, doubting themselves, afraid to speak. To them I wanted to say, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs you not to look away, because the quietest person in the room can change everything. If she listens long enough, if she refuses to let fear decide what she's worth. I turned off the light, set the mug down, and finally allowed myself a smile. Justice, not revenge, had found its home. Revenge burns fast and leaves ash. Justice builds slowly, leaving room for others to stand on solid ground. And with that thought, I whispered a small goodbye to the fear, to the noise, to the long nights spent chasing honesty through tangled wires and forged signatures. The story that began with my firing had ended with my freedom. My journey was done. If you believe truth always finds its way, even through the darkest silence, share this story. Let someone who's afraid know that quiet honesty can still win.